Today we have with us Dr. Ilene Cohen. Dr. Jane, I'd like you to tell us a little something about yourself.
I've lived a long life, so it's hard to answer succinctly. The greatest achievement that I think that I've accomplished, being able to come into the present moment, which leads to the second one, which has to do with developing a thought system based on the principle that life is designed to work, which it can only happen in the present moment. And writing a book describing that.
Hello and welcome to the Life Wisdom Podcast. My name is Rohit. I believe that life is our greatest teacher. Through every experience, pleasant or unpleasant, we have learned many life lessons. In the process, we have grown, matured, and evolved. In this podcast, we invite regular people like me and you. We want to know your life story and your life lessons. We want you to know that you matter. Your life matters, and the life lessons you learned are your greatest wealth and are worth sharing with friends, family, and the world. Dr. Jane, you call that a system for being in the present moment. Tell us a little more about that. Is that a way of thinking?
You could say a spiritual philosophy.
Okay.
Like A Course in Miracles or something like that.
If there was a very short way of presenting that, how would you put it?
In its undistorted form, life works wonderfully well. What causes life not to work generally are limiting decisions, such as I'm stupid, I'm not good enough, I'm bad, the world's a dangerous place. Anything that implies that life doesn't work, there's usually one or more limiting decisions holding that in place, distorting your experience of reality. The therapeutic work I do with people is clearing limiting decisions. Well, there's quite a process that I went through that I was sharing with you this evening, how I came to this. So in about 1970, I read Ram Dass's book, Read Here Now. Richard Albert is also how he's known. I came away from reading it with recognizing that coming into the present moment is extremely important. But try as hard as I might, I couldn't manage to do it. I spent hours and hours trying to do it. And it just evaded me. The thing was, I didn't really understand what it meant. So I didn't even know how to go about approaching it.
I think that's a really important point you're bringing up. That is how where most people are at. They don't quite know what that means. So I think what you're going to bring forth is something extremely valuable. Please proceed. Tell me more.
And I can give a very quick explanation right now, but then it's a deeper thing that I'll go into after that. The quick explanation is being aware of what you're feeling, being aware of what you're seeing, being aware of what you're hearing, being aware of what you're doing. That brings you into the present moment. Most people block what they're feeling in areas of their life that they don't want to feel or be aware of.
Right. So that's the process you're describing. But you were starting to tell us about your story. You were starting to tell us about how you arrived at this because you were struggling with it in your life. So I'd like to know a little bit more. But then what led to that understanding?
All right. So after that, about a year after that, I experienced a pretty transformative experience. It lasted quite a long time, which led to me understanding how to do it, but in a more visceral way than what I just described. I joined a New Age spiritual community. I've always had a great desire to be a good person, but the spiritual leader judged me and most of the others in the group as bad. And she said that we needed to save our souls.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. All right. So, it was more or less actually a cult, but I didn't know it at the time. It was a very, very difficult experience trying to save my soul. I mean, I laugh now because it's so ridiculous, but it wasn't ridiculous to me at the time. I took it very seriously. And you could say I already had a limiting decision that it was bad. So I sort of easily bought into that. It was very confrontational and judgmental and stressful. Basically, it was emotionally abusive. And I went through many dark nights of the soul, feeling as though I was failing at saving my soul. And one particularly difficult one, I made a deal with God I said, if God would help me through this experience, I would help other people do the same. And in retrospect, from that point on, I had more and more of a sense that I was meant to be a healer, which eventually I became. But in the meanwhile, when I stayed in the community before I actually became a healer. So at that point, I had faced the possibility that I was a bad person. And I had found right to the very bottom to explore, to try to find it. And I couldn't find it.
What was that? The bad person part or the soul part?
The bad person part. I
Okay.
couldn't find the bad person. I was trying as hard as I might.
Right.
It all seems sort of silly now, but
Yeah.
it wasn't to me because I took it very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And then
was that part of the teaching too, that you're essentially a bad person?
Oh yeah, she was judging me as that I was a bad person trying to save my soul, as she was doing it with the other people. So eventually I realized this was a dead end.
Yeah.
I'd reached the very bottom of this. I couldn't find it. I was just wasting my time going around in circles. And so at that point, I realized the how mistaken and dysfunctional the concept of good and bad people was. And I also realized what happens when you allow your experience of reality to be defined by someone else.
It's a very powerful experience, because I've gone through the same thing and I completely understand what you're saying. Because we give our power away. We think somebody else knows more than we do. We think that that person is somehow the authority, and it plays into some of our deepest wounding. I call that religious wounding, where we believe that, somehow we are sinners and we are horrible people, and we are damned and so on and so forth. And here comes this person who's going to save our soul, who's going to, make everything okay for us. And a lot of us fall into this trap, knowingly or unknowingly. There's a lot of people who don't necessarily join a cult or a group like that, but are still in that mindset and mentality. So how did you get out of that then? How did you wake up to what was going on?
So as I was saying, I realized, because I followed it right to the very end. I really explored it very.
What do you mean to the end?
I kept searching for it until I realized, hey, you're going around in circles. There's no way forward here. It just occurred to me because I, completely followed it to as far as I could. And so for one thing I gained out of that realization, I learned a lot about what causes life not to work. That whole situation was a really good example of backwards thinking and dysfunctional thinking. Okay. So that was very helpful.
So tell me, what was backwards and what was not functional over there?
So when you please the spiritual leader, you're a good person. When you didn't please her, you were a bad person.
Okay.
If you were, totally responsible and taking care of everything and making her feel safe. I mean, it's a lot of really crazy stuff. So we were basically slaves to the good people, and it was just crazy.
Yeah.
There was some positive things about it as well, which is the reason why I stayed there for as long as I did. I realized what happens when you let someone else define reality for you, which was not good.
And in some way, don't we let everyone define our reality, right? From our friends, our culture. Nowadays, it's Instagram. Before it was the TV and the magazines.
In areas in which we have limiting decisions.
Right. But we all have that, don't we? Isn't there a universal context to this?
We always have a choice in every moment, whether we, what we use as our plumb line, what we orient our reality around.
Okay.
Do we orient around the person who's just triggered us, trying to prove that our perception of reality is right? Or do we keep our orientation around divine source? The way I describe that is life, truth, love, principle, intelligence, integrity, inspiration, and so on.
Those are the qualities of divine source.
Correct.
Or God.
And where you focus around those, you're focused around the source.
Right.
So every moment you have a choice.
Yeah. So that becomes your guideline. If you can keep that as your north point or your plumb line, as you call it, then that will keep you on the right track.
Right.
Right. And if you go off that, what were those points you were bringing up? Truth.
Life, truth, love, principle, consciousness, intelligence, inspiration. I think I've said 7.
I think we could go through a whole discussion on what each of those is, but I'm not going to get into that deep down into the rabbit hole here.
Yeah, I have discussed that in my book. That situation in the spiritual community forced me into seeing reality from my own eyes, rather than blindly following someone else to define reality for me, because clearly it didn't work what I was doing. I had to see things from my own eyes. That was obviously the only way forward. And it was the only way that I could endure staying at the spiritual community. And it was the only way that I gained the strength to leave it. And it was a process. I mean, I started defining my own terms. They had us on duty all the time I was taking care of an autistic girl, that's a whole other subject, because it's the reason I became a counselor, really, because of her. I was almost totally not awake when I joined the spiritual community, and awake to a very large degree by the time I left. I had begun to be here now.
What does it mean to be awake? Is that what you're saying?
It means coming into present moment from your own eyes. I left the spiritual community. I had been in the spiritual community for 22 years, believe it or not. I was something like 26 when I joined it and 48 when I left.
Wow, for 22 years. Gosh.
When I do something, I really do it. I don't go halfway.
Would you care to name the organization, or do you not want to do that?
Well, I'd rather not. It doesn't exist anymore anyway.
Okay.
And the spiritual leader is no longer alive.
Okay.
So I was in a state of limbo, because having realized how dysfunctional the spiritual community was, I was no longer orienting my sense of reality around that perspective.
Right.
And I had been outside of mainstream experience for 22 years as well.
Yeah, completely cut off from everything.
So I was in a state of limbo, and I was having panic attacks. Actually, I was living in an apartment by myself, but at any rate, I started studying A Course in Miracles very, very intensely. And I studied it for 2 years intensely. And in retrospect, realized that what I was doing was building a positive plumb line, you could say, to orient my sense of reality around. It helped me to build a positive frame of reference. About 2 years later, I found out about NLP and Time Line Therapy. And I found myself on a plane going to Hawaii to study with Dr. Tad James, who was my teacher and the foremost developer of Time Line Therapy. He developed that. And
I
so
studied under his son, Matt James.
Matt James, yeah. The main thing that I got out of having studied A Course in Miracles and NLP was the idea that life is designed to work. Actually, it first occurred to me that life is meant to work, but I eventually changed it to designed to work. Neither of them actually says that, but that was just the gist of it to me. That's what sort of the core of what they really meant.
Could you explain that concept? Could you explain that idea a little more?
That life works wonderfully well, and that the universe is filled with resources. And the only thing that prevents us from going towards or receiving what really matters to us is blocking them on some level, on some unconscious level, or distorting them. And so the objective is to remove the distortions and allow life to bless you, basically.
So the distortions are what's in the way.
Yes.
And the distortions are, what are they?
Limiting decisions.
Limiting decisions that we made at some point in our life?
Usually they're maybe before the age of 6 or 7, sometimes in adolescence. They can be at birth, in the womb, past lifetime, past generation.
Okay. So once you remove those decisions, and you said those decisions are like, I'm not good enough, something is wrong with me, that kind of stuff, right?
And it can be about people can't be trusted. It can be just the way the world works.
So once we remove those, what happens then?
In the process of removing them, I'm pulling out the distortion, and the unconscious mind reconfigures itself without it. The objective is to become more and more truly who you are.
Correct.
Because the soul is perfect, just the way it is.
So it's
the distortions that cause the problem.
Life works, it was designed to work, and the soul is perfect as it is. These are the two main points you're bringing up. Okay, lovely.
Right. So I took that stand, although I didn't really know it to be true. It was I didn't even decide it consciously. It was just, I was doing it. And it feels like a soul level decision. That's what happened when I started working with clients. I would get down to the core of what was structuring the problem and get to what the limiting decisions were.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason I can do that is because I had learned to come into the present moment. So I could come into the present moment with my clients so that I actually experience what they're experiencing to understand where the problem was.
Right.
And on top of that, when I took a stand that life is designed to work, it's like I walked through a portal. A whole new perspective of reality opened up for me. And I started tapping into that body of knowledge. And it also occurred when I was working with clients, because I would tune into them and that would sort of inform me and inspire me so that I was able to sort of get to the bottom of things. The book that I wrote is called Your Life is Designed to Work, a psychological and spiritual guide.
And is it available on Amazon, or where do people go? Okay, great.
On Amazon.
Wonderful. When life works, what's it like? What does it feel like?
It feels like you're sort of guided. If you keep asking for guidance, it's like a co-creative process with the divine. So the human, the role the human being plays is your desires. Now, there has to be real desires as opposed to substitute desires. The thought system describes real world, substitute world, real self and substitute persona, and real true desires versus substitute desires.
I know that's going to be a very deep topic, but I think if I want to put that in a very simple way, there is what you might break it down to as the real world, real desires, real self. And then there is what you're calling the substitute. The substitute is what we all live in, if I understand that correctly. That is all what we would call, in the Vedas, we would call that Maya or illusion. That is the conditioning. That is the way the world is constructed, and the sort of trap we fall into, believing all this to be real, believing this body, believing this mind, believing our thoughts to be all that is. Whereas, in fact, there is another reality that you seem to be alluding to.
We are not always in the substitute world. Sometimes we're in the real world, and sometimes we're in the substitute world. We're just in the substitute world in the areas in which our experience is distorted by limiting decisions.
When are we in the real world, and what is that like? And what is the real world according to you?
The real world is the present moment.
Mm-hmm. What is it like? How do I know it to be different from the substitute world?
Because you're going towards life. You're going towards love. You're going towards intelligence. You're really present. You're not afraid of what's really true.
So when somebody's out at the bar drinking and is partying with their friends, are they in the real world or the substitute world?
Probably the substitute world. That's just my perspective. I mean, it's not something that I would go to a bar and start drinking, because to me that would just be an avoidance of anything real.
Right. So I'm trying to make this real for the person who's watching so that they can understand. You may have a greater experience of the real world, and you may live there most of the time. You may be in a place of greater authenticity and of love and all of that, but I want to relate to the person who's watching this so they know what you mean.
Okay, so I need to explain about substitute desires.
Absolutely.
Because that's sort of inherent in the question.
Yep.
So if you make a limiting decision that you're not lovable. Now, love is an inherent human need. It's very difficult for people to survive without love. So what they do, since they don't believe they can really have love, they develop substitute desires that symbolize love that they can control. It might be comfort foods, or it may be someone to do certain things for you or to you that symbolize that they love you. It's always something that they feel as though they can control. It's an addiction, just as drinking and so on. It's things that you do, and you have to do more and more of it because it never really solves the problem.
Right. That is a clear symptom that you're in the substitute world, because it is fake. So the same could apply to thinking that making money is going to solve all your problems, that it's going to be everything, finding the ideal partner is going to be everything, right? Would you agree with all of that? That those
Yes.
are the ways in which we try to fill the gap or the emptiness within ourselves, but it never really happens, whether it's taking a drug, whether it's trying to, I don't know, sports, TV, whatever we do to try to escape to our reality.
So the solution is to recognize what you're doing.
Yes, yes.
I mean, and
So what is a
people,
clear
when people
symptom?
hit rock bottom,
Mhm.
when they realize that the addiction is killing them, or destroying them, or going nowhere, then they are a lot of people are open to a more spiritual perspective.
Right, exactly. So how do they know they're off alignment? Or the plumb line, as you were calling it. How do they know they're not in that resonance or in that space?
Just life isn't working.
Oh, yes, okay. What does that mean when it's not working?
That means you keep on going towards the same kind of relationships that don't work. You're becoming massively overweight from eating junk food.
Okay.
You're the things that you're doing to try to fill yourself or make yourself feel better actually are harmful. And you do it long enough, you can kill yourself.
Right. Okay, that's good. And I did start asking you the question, what does it feel like when life is working? So I want to your personal experience there of what it feels like when you're in alignment.
It feels like being supported, like a energy support, where you're just flowing along and you sort of see the right path in front of you. I mean, it's like I'm always asking for guidance. I don't always receive it.
Yeah.
Eventually I do.
So guidance seems to imply that there is a greater wisdom out there,
Right.
a source that is able to guide us and show us the right way. It is not based upon what somebody says or what someone thinks, but is directly communicating with us. So in other words, we could say God is communicating with us. If you want to use the more impersonal word, the universe is communicating with us. Or if you want to have a personal relationship, whichever. But something is guiding us if we are willing to be in alignment, if we are willing to make our desires aligned with that. Is that also what you're talking about, the desires?
Yeah, it has to do with like an openness to receiving. I open myself to life working.
What does openness come from? What does it mean to have an openness? Letting go
of control.
Control.
The only way you can be in co-creation with the divine is you express what it is you desire, and then you release it to the divine, because the form that it comes in is probably not going to be in the form that you're expecting. It's sort of, sometimes I feel as though divine is playing games with me or tricks, because I have this idea of what I want and how it's going to look, and I receive the gist of it, but it's a completely different way than I was expecting. It's sort of humorous.
Right. So we have our desires, but that which we come from, or God, has its own vision of how things need to be, and we need to let go of control of trying to have things our way. Would that be?
Yeah. And it's like the divine is always thinking of new and innovative ways to show me that I don't have control, but that's actually a good thing, because better things occur when I let go of it.
Okay, and if there is any last piece of wisdom that you want to share with the world, and you've spent a lot of time writing your books, teaching people, what would be your message to future generations? What is the legacy that they can tap into?
So I would say, and I think I've mentioned this to you before, pay attention to what you are orienting your life around. In other words, pay attention to, notice, are you paying more attention to what's wrong in the world and what's wrong with other people? Is that where your focus is? Or is your focus is coming into alignment with divine source? In other words, are you focused on what is loving, what is truthful, what's in integrity, what's full of life, what's inspirational, and so on? So every moment you have a choice, and whichever one you choose determines whether you're a part of the problem or the solution.
Wow, that's a great way of putting it. Thank you, Dr. Jane. Thank you so much for your words. Are there any ways in which people can reach you or contact you? Do you still, see people and help them with their limiting
I do.
beliefs?
Yeah.
You do. Do you have like a website? How do people reach you?
Yeah, I do. My website is janecohencounseling.com.
All right. Excellent. JaneCohenCounseling.com. Yeah. Now
All
they
right,
can go to
yeah.
your website, and once they're there, they'll find your
Yeah.
phone number and everything else. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. It means a lot. It means a lot to all of us that you've worked your entire life. You've come up with these understandings. These understandings have helped you personally.
They
And
have.
that's where it makes, when we say wisdom, we mean that which has helped us in our own life, not just some theoretical concepts, but that which has actually transformed our life. And
I
if
wouldn't have been able to write my book if I hadn't gone through all of that.
And would you say that when life works, it feels good? It feels
yeah.
better than it did before?
Yeah.
Great. So we would like to pass that on to everyone, to have your life work for all of you who are listening and watching. And then as your life works, be able to share that message with others as well by coming into the present moment and by becoming aware with all your senses, with your seeing, with your hearing, as Dr. Jane was saying, with all aspects of your life, with what you're
I
doing.
say one last thing about that.
Sure.
When you are coming into the present moment and co-creating with the divine, you're also connecting with the divine. You're connecting with that love energy,
Right.
heart energy, all the different aspects. It's just blissful. So, and that's real desires are things that really benefit you. So you're never giving up real desires. You're going towards them. And the bliss of connecting with larger source for me is worth everything.
It has been for me as well. That bliss of connecting with source, the divine, God, has been my life's complete purpose and meaning, because I found that everything else was hollow and empty. I found that what people were doing wasn't satisfying them, that no matter how much they had, they weren't happy. And then as I began to walk this path and began to apply the spiritual teachings, I found they work, and that you actually experience that blissfulness. And then you realize that is coming not from outside, but it's coming from inside you. And it's coming from your connection with the divine, with God. And that really, goes beyond any religious thing, because, religious, you're sort of following some process or some path. But here you're actually experiencing it for yourself. And I think that makes all the difference.
It does. It does. And we can also find that in our connections with other people, because we all have all the attributes of the divine inherent in us. And when we relate to other people from that perspective, that's what we find. It's just amazing.
So I would go so far as to say that if you think you have a connection with God, but you do not find that connection with yourself, and you do not find it with others, you do not find it with the world at large, then you don't really have a connection. The connection that you have becomes pervasive. It goes in all directions. God is not just found in a book or in a teaching or in a particular place of worship, but is found in all teachings, in all places. In the places where you think these are the bad places, even there. Found within yourself, within all others, within all beings, within all of life.
It's just inherent in life. I sometimes think I should call my thought system spiritual physics.
Spiritual physics. That's a good way of putting it. You should do that. That's a good name.
Because love is just there. It's foundational.
Yes.
And truth is foundational, and principle is all these things are foundational for reality. They're foundational because they
are the absolute truth. That is what is true. And when there is lack of love, then you are not in the alignment with that source, with God. When there is a lack of truth, you are not in alignment. When you are trying
absolutely logical.
Run away from life, you're not in connection with God. You have disconnected. And when you have disconnected, then there's going to be suffering. So I think that's the key, the heart of your message as well.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we'll wind up with that.
Thank you, Rohit.
And thank you so much for your presence here. Appreciate it. Thank
I
you.
always love connecting with your loving soul.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And to all of those who are listening and watching, please keep growing in your wisdom and your truth. And someday come join us here. We'd love to be able to talk with you as well.